I want to bring to order the special called October 1st meeting of the Richland 2 Board of Trustees. If I can please have a motion to approve our agenda.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I move to approve the agenda of the today's date, October 1st, 2019, special call board meeting for the purpose of policy review.
All right, motion's been made by Ms. Mackey. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Caution Parker. Is there any discussion? With no discussion, we'll have the vote at this time. Is everybody logged in where they can vote online, or raise your right hand? All in favor? Motion passes 5-0. Please take note that Dr. Holmes certainly has had a passing in the family and won't be with us tonight, and Dr. Elkins Johnson was not able to make it tonight as well. So with that, we will move on to the first order of business. New business, no action requested. With policies, Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the board, we will be walking through policy proposals with you tonight. This is the second section of I. Individuals who are over the specific areas will come before you one at a time to address these policies as we review them with you, starting with policy IHCF, child programs, and we'll proceed from there. Ms. Gregory.
Right. Child care programs, we've just added additional bullet items under child care programs, facilities, half-day kindergarten, leased property, and updated legal references to the policy. All right, the next policy, IHD, Adult Community Education. We have added paragraph on adult education program membership and updated legal references to this policy.
Mr. Chair, this is just from my understanding, so that students have to be 17 years old to go into adult education. Students younger would not be accepted?
That is correct. And we
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Mr. Shad.
Dr. Davis and Ms. Gregory, are we, I know it doesn't specifically state it, but is it part of any part of the curriculum with regard to entrepreneurship, anything along those lines? I see job training, employment skills, but for adult ed, because I know we offer it for students that are not in adult ed. I'll characterize it like that. But are we giving them that same opportunity, those same types of skills?
not to my knowledge, but
Thank you. Good evening.
To meet the requirements for an economics credit, which covers financial literacy under the new economics standards. Additionally, if you are a GED student, a high school equivalency diploma student at the W.R. Rogers Center, there is a program through orientation in which banks come in and offer students assistance in opening bank accounts and that sort of thing. And that's an ongoing, they go every other week. They attend every other week. So there is that, and there's always assistance through our transition specialist that's there.
Okay. I don't know if that necessarily answers my question, because that essentially teaches them life skills on how to budget and that sort of thing. But just in terms of becoming an entrepreneur, nothing?
There's no course with regards to that, but embedded in both of those programs are opportunities for students to seek assistance. So through that program, if a student wanted, for example, I was the assistant principal at Adult Ed, so that's where my experience comes from. With regards to that, we often had students that were already had businesses, lawn mowing businesses and that sort of thing that they wanted to expand. So we did support the students there. So there is support there for them. The partnerships there have been different partnerships over the time I was there. The most recent, I believe it's with TD Bank. That may have changed since I left there. And so if a student could apply for a loan, open a bank account, and help with assistance in there. So we certainly had the structure there so that students could ask for assistance if they needed it.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any further questions?
So, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir, Mr.
Just
Shad.
in the second full paragraph then that I was addressing, if my colleagues are in agreement, I would make a motion that we just add the language, and it doesn't matter where it is, I guess. In front of job training, if we could put entrepreneurial skills. So it would read, the adult education program may offer courses in entrepreneurial skills, job training, employment skills, enrichment, and continuing education. And that's, of course, it just says it may offer. So, of course, it's not something mandatory, but I'd rather we at least have it and maybe explore it sometime in the future. Thank you.
All right, so motion's been made by Mr. Shad to add the language is recommended with entrepreneurial programs. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Mackey. Is there any discussion? With no discussion, all in favor, raise your right hand. And all against? All right, motion passes 4-1. Any other discussion or comments on this policy?
All right, the
All right, go ahead, Ms.
next policy is IIA, grouping for instruction, minor editorial revisions, and legal references have been added.
Board members, any questions or comments on IIA grouping for instruction? All right.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir, Mr. Shad.
Ms. Gregory, for the second full paragraph, the last sentence, grouping will never create or support a system of discrimination on the basis of, and I know those are historically our folks that are in a protected class under the federal statute, discrimination statute, the Civil Rights Act of
That's
1964.
That's correct.
But of course, we have evolved and expanded that to include sexual orientation. I believe also, I want to make sure I'm right, Dr. Grant, sexual identity, I think that may be correct. So
Where it
So,
says
yes.
discrimination on the basis of race, religion, sex, or socioeconomic status, he is correct in the legal reference. It is referenced Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is where that is taken.
And so since it tracks that statute, I'd like to make a motion that we also add sexual orientation, sexual identity, gender identity status. That's it? Yes, that's it.
Mr. Shad or Mr.
go,
Chair,
Ms.
I was going to
Agostini.
say, I have the switching of the sex out to gender.
Actually, it's a difference
But
between the two.
perhaps, well, I'm wondering if our Human Resources Officer could help us with that, because she has that written in a lot of her policies of what's not discriminated against.
Is there a second on the motion?
Well, I think we had a motion, original motion on the floor.
Second.
You have Title IX is
But I wanna
also
make-
referenced.
I just want to make sure that Mr. Shad got everything in it that he wanted. So if you could just repeat, Mr. Shad, what you were asking for.
Yes, that we add to that language the four that we have.
And according to the Title IX statement on the website, it is sexual orientation,
Sexual orientation,
gender identity status.
gender identity
That would
status,
match
those
with
two.
our Title IX equal access statement, those two terms.
Which is on our website.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion's been made by Mr. Shad. Do I have a second?
My second stands.
Seconded by Ms. Mackey. All right, for any comments? And I'm going to support it. I just wonder if maybe saying something about the, on the basis of, or something referencing the title, so that as the title changes, it would update versus specifically listing it out every time and then having to come back. I don't know if that's an easier way to keep it up in the future, but But we have a motion and a second on the floor. So, all right, everybody in support of the motion, if you'll raise your right hand. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Further comments or questions on IAA? All right, we'll move on to policy IJ.
Instructional board resources and materials, information has been added, and survey approval, updated legal references.
Questions or comments on policy IJ, item 3.4?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Agostini.
Thank you. On page number 2, the second group of bullet points, I just need clarification or understanding. It starts off, additionally, parents, guardians must receive notice and an opportunity to opt a student out of participation in the following. And the second bullet point says, any non-emergency invasive physical exam or screening required as a condition of attendance. And my big question is the invasive physical exam and opting out. Would that not be something that we would want written permission? And why would we be doing some type of invasive physical exam, unless I'm not understanding it?
This came with the language from the School Board Association, isn't that correct, Dr. Franklin? And it goes along with Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, if I understand correctly. Yes. So it's the language that comes from that. So we can investigate further.
I would like, if it's the will of the board, to investigate it further, just because I have no understanding of why it's an opt-out and not a written request, and what type of invasive physical exam we would be conducting.
So, Ms. Agostini, are you asking to make a motion to table this upon further?
Postpone the vote, or postpone it.
Okay. Well, so I guess we're not taking action on it, so you want to have that information maybe before we come back for the vote then?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'm not quite sure exactly what we're asking, so if we could make it a little bit more clear, what specifically are you all asking, what specifically is the board asking us to find information out regarding this?
Actually, what it means, any non-emergency invasive physical exam, why would we be doing that? Why would we provide an opportunity to opt a student out? Why would it not request written permission? What are they meaning by an invasive physical exam?
I interpret that to say that that does not happen without notice.
Well, this is saying opt out. Must receive notice and an opportunity to opt out, which means if they don't submit the
cover everything. I think it's just to cover everything, whether we do it. But I think it's just to cover everything. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Dr. Caution Parker.
I think, in my opinion, I think it's just to cover everything that could ever happen, and this would cover it.
Just to give some clarification, I think additionally, parents, guardians must receive notice and an opportunity to opt a student out of participating in the following, which means we cannot do this without giving them an opportunity to opt out. We will not do an invasive physical exam, but I believe invasive is such a word that could be interpreted by anyone as invasive. So if for certain reasons you have to ask a student to hold his shirt up or remove some article of clothing to examine whether or not a student was injured, that could be considered invasive. So you would call a parent first to say the student is injured, I want to do X, Y, and Z. Can I proceed, and give them an opportunity to say, no, do not proceed, do not do an examination of my student. Particularly if there was a nurse. I think we had a policy or a conversation recently that came across our desk about rectal examinations for student athletes. Which would be evasive. So this would be one of those policies that would protect us from putting in or doing a rectal examination of a student because of heat exhaustion on the football field. We would need to try to communicate with parents before we would give those, but we do not perform invasive examinations to my knowledge. But we would, if we needed to do an examination that would consider to be invasive, we would need to get some sort of approval from parents ahead of time before we would proceed.
Well, and I guess that's my point, because this is saying opt out. I would like for it to say, for that type of thing, to be granted permission, to get permission, versus notifying them or sending home a take-home note and not having a response.
If it was an emergency situation, to give written permission could take, we could not perform an examination in case it was an emergency. So if we were required to have it in writing, then it could prolong the incident,
Well,
or
it could be-
prolong the examination should there need to be one.
Ms. Agostini, I guess I'm trying to understand the difference between what you're asking and what it says. So they must receive notice, so you have to be notified as a parent. You have to be given an opportunity to basically to say yes or no. So I'm not sure how that, the only difference with what you're asking is you say you want it in writing. Is that what I'm
I
understanding?
know, and I was saying, Gore, and I guess, and perhaps I didn't, take in the must-receive notice. I'm just looking at an opportunity. I want them to be given permission.
As I mentioned earlier, and Libby said the same thing, but I think it's
It's right
the
here.
exact wording from the law, and it is referenced in Federal Law Protection of People Rights Amendment of 1978, and I think it's the exact verbiage. And
So the law specifies how you have to write these, what you have to give notice of. And so that protection of people rights dictates what has to be in that policy and the way it has to be worded. So we'd have to look at that to make sure, but typically that's how those notices work. It's based on the federal law, and the federal law gives you a whole list of things. And most likely that invasive exam is, that terminology is in there because that's that's exactly coming from the federal law.
Libby also puts it it's in the Back to School Handbook on page 8.
Because we're required to give that notice every year.
And I guess I'm looking at it differently. I appreciate how you've all explained it and how you view it. I'm thinking of the kid that's given the note to take home to their parent, say for a sex education class, and the parent has to fill it out in order for them to opt out. Well, the parents did get the information, or maybe did not get the information, and then they didn't bring it back.
So, Ms. Agostini, I guess at this point, I'm going to ask you if you have a recommendation to change the policy.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Shad?
just while we were talking, I went ahead and looked up the federal statute, and it does specifically say that the local education agency shall, and then it goes to stating the right of a parent of a student to inspect, blah, 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 blah. They shall be given notice and an opportunity to opt out. This is the federal law, to opt out of those things listed in subsection C, which talks about all these things that are in this proposed policy. So like Ms. Gregory said and Ms. Ruth said, this tracks almost verbatim the federal statute.
And that's why we also have it in the Back to School Handbook. Thank you, Libby.
I appreciate it, but again, I want to give Ms. Agostini, are you asking to make are you requesting to make a change to make this more restrictive than the federal law requires?
No, I appreciate your clarification.
Okay, so we're good? All right, any other comments or questions? All right, if we can move on to item 3.5, IJJ, textbook selection and adoption.
Yes, and on this one, there's added information regarding the South Carolina Department of Ed's approved list. They added a paragraph on state management system, and again, updated legal references.
Board members, questions or comments? With no questions and comments, we'll move on to item 3.6, IJK.
All right, IJK, supplementary material selection and adoption. They removed outdated technologies for the list of materials and added computer software, electronic media.
Board members, questions or comments? We'll move on to item 3.7, IJKA, technology resource selection and adoption.
All right, there were only minor editorial revisions here, and Mr. Cramner is available if there are questions on this one also.
Board members, questions or comments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Agostini.
I have a question. It's under software, the second paragraph. All software purchased by the district or any of its schools will remain the official property of the district regardless of the funding source. We have a lot of PTOs and education foundations that go out and buy hardware and software for their specific school. Would this fall under those guidelines that it now becomes the property of the district and the district could potentially take it away from a school where that parent organization has raised funds to support the school?
Yeah, there's a number of funding sources that are used, grants, et cetera, PTAs, other sources, but if the school purchases it, it remains at the school where it was purchased. It's not moved anywhere else in the district. So it remains the property of the district, but it remains at the school where it was particularly purchased, if it was a funding like that.
Okay, Ms. Mackey.
Mr. Manny, I think this is in tandem with the policy we discussed earlier this year with regard to crowdfunding and any sort of items that are purchased with a teacher's fundraising, that whatever you acquire in the name of the school remains at the school. I think it's in tandem with that.
Okay, other questions or comments? We'll move on to 3.8, IJL.
All right, IJL, Library/Media Center Material Selection and Adoption. In this policy, the policy name has been edited, added Media Center in conjunction with Library, and then updates to the bullets.
Board members, questions or comments? All right, item 3.9, wow, IJNDAA.
Yes. Distance, online, and virtual education. We've edited the policy name here, added a paragraph listing course credit requirements for grades 9 through 12, added information regarding the district review committee and state-run virtual education program. Additionally, legal references.
All right, board members, any questions or comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Agostini.
This is just from my understanding. What is a distance course?
A distance course is a course that we are teaching from another location. I guess, Emily, is that the best way to describe it? And sometimes we will have several at different campuses running at the same time, but it is running from a different location, and it is usually run, it's not online like an online course, but it is run through media.
So I'm watching somebody on a screen or something
you
do a
are.
live course, like, okay.
You are,
just,
like
all
you
right.
may be a chemistry teacher, and they may not be at your school, they may be at another location, but you are getting the instruction through.
Okay, other questions or comments? All right, item 3.10, IJNDB.
All right. IJNDB. That is electronic communications and data management systems, acceptable use of technology. And that has just very minor changes. Again, just redoing the purpose, and I think just very, very minor editing.
Board members, questions or comments? Item 3.11, IJOA.
All right. IJOA is school-sponsored field studies. This has been updated with current best practices on field studies, including an updated definition, updated legal references.
Board members, questions or comments? Move on to item 3.12, IJOB/IJO.
All right, this one Libya is coming to address. This model replaces, actually, there are two being merged, IJOB, IJOC together.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The one thing that we wanted, this is merging those two, and when we merged them, or got the merged copy, the word community was taken off of resources, and I didn't catch that until reading it through for a final time this week. So there's one additional recommendation that we'd like to make for y'all to consider tonight is instead of referring to it as resource persons, which sometimes has different meanings in education setting, we'd like to refer to it as community partners/school volunteers. Community partners is in line with our mission and vision and strategic plan. So wherever you see resource persons, we'd like to make that change to say community partners and volunteers. Other than that, it's basically the combining of those two policies.
Okay, board members, questions or comments?
If
Yes, ma'am.
a motion is required, I'm happy to make it at this time, Mr. Chair.
It's probably best to go ahead and do that, if you'll go forward. Yeah.
I move to accept administration's recommendation that where resource persons is listed, that it would be replaced with community partners. And you said and school volunteers or
School volunteers is there. We would
Gotcha.
replace the
All right.
resource persons with community partners.
So
Okay.
moved.
Motion's been made. Do I have a second? Second. Seconded by Mr. Shad. Is there any discussion? All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion passes unanimously. Other questions or comments? All right, we will move on to 3.13, IJOB.
All right, and that is merged, IJOB and IJOC are together.
So you're asking to have that one removed?
Right.
Or, right, it's all, okay.
Because that's correct.
So any questions or comments, board members, about that deletion?
So now it's IJOB/IJOC.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on to 3.14 then, IJOC, same idea, deletion. Any questions or comments from board members? All right, we'll move on to 3.15, IKAA, tests and examinations.
Testing examinations, just the information with minor editorial revisions here.
Board members, questions or comments? 3.16, IKAB.
IKAB is again minor editorial revisions. We did make some changes about ongoing access to grades in the student information system.
Board members, questions or comments? 3.17, IKACA.
IKACA, parent conferences, again, just minor editorial revisions.
Board members, questions or comments? IKACA, parent conferences. Yes, sir. Any questions or comments? 3.18, IKC, class rankings.
Class rankings, again, just some minor revisions, editorial revisions.
Board members, questions or comments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Agostini.
the junior marshals will be selected based on rank at the end of the sophomore year, adjusted as needed for enrollment. I do know that some schools actually pick it after the second semester of their junior year. Will the schools be notified or communicated of what the policy reads?
All policies will be communicated, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, other questions or comments? 3.19, IKD, honor rolls.
Okay, on honor rolls, again, just minor editorial revisions on IKD honor rolls.
Board members, questions or comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Agostini.
The second sentence, the board will support programs that recognize outstanding student achievement which exceed minimum requirements in these areas. I'm wondering if we could change the word minimum to either basic, expected, or standard. Exceeding minimum requirements to me doesn't appear to me to be an honor roll or award, why somebody would need recognition.
All right, so what's your motion on that then?
My motion would be to change the word minimum to standard.
Okay, minimum. So Ms. Agostini's made a motion to change the word minimum to standard. Is there a second? And with no second, the motion fails. Other questions or comments? All right, we will move on to item 3.20, IKE, promotion and retention of students.
Promotion and retention of students, most of these are, the title has been modified. These are the district's recently adopted versions, but again, minor editorial revisions for consistency.
Board members, questions or comments? Item 3.21, IKF, graduation requirements.
Okay. And graduation requirements, IKF, we've updated the legal references, added information on U.S. citizenship, immigration test, awarding of high school credit, and again, minor editorial revisions. Especially under career prep, we have brought that up to date with, instead of work keys, when, and again, all of that has been updated.
Board members' questions or comments on policy IKF? We'll move on to 3.22, policy IL, evaluation of instructional programs.
All right, on IL, minor editorial revisions. The verbiage for instructional staff versus teachers, just very minor editorial revisions.
Board members' questions or comments? Item 3.23, ILB, test/assessment administration.
Minor editorial revisions to policy. It says no child left behind, but again, just minor editorial revisions and updates.
Board members' questions or comments? Item 3.24, ILBB, state program assessments.
State program assessments. Again, minor editorial revisions, updated legal references, added language on IEP and 504 plan, statewide summative assessment.
Board members' questions or comments? Item 3.25, IMB, teaching about controversial/sensitive issues.
All right, that is not in my, okay. Minor editorial revisions.
All right, board members' questions or comments? Item 3.26, IMD, school ceremonies and observances.
Okay, IMD, school ceremonies and observations. We have added information on student-led messages, updated legal references, and then the title.
Okay, and just a note that it does say IMD, school ceremonies and observations there, and on our board docs it says observances.
It does, and it does on my sheet too. So, which we'll make note of that and check, because you're correct.
The policy is actually observed. I think it's just wrong in our board docs, so. Okay, so board members' questions or comments about this, about policy IMD, school ceremonies and observations?
Okay, this is, like we said, just added information and student-led messages, updated legal references.
Questions or comments? Item 3.27, IMDB, flag displays.
Item flag displays, again, updated legal references, minor editorial revisions.
Board members' questions or comments? And item 3.28, IMG, service animals.
And with that one, Ms. Davis is here. This is just a model. This district doesn't currently have this policy.
Okay, any further comment or from you?
This is a new policy based on, of course, you've heard a lot about service animals in the community, and so to address that in the school setting, we're presenting to you the model policy. In addition to the policy, we're drafting an administrative rule.
Okay, board members' questions or comments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Agostini.
just a couple of questions. First of all, we're only permitting dogs?
Yes, ma'am, at this time, that's what the standard is dogs.
Okay, and then my other question, it says essentially that we can't ask for any identification, training documentation for the animal, or ask that the animal demonstrate. I'm just wondering, do they have to show some type of license or certificate that it's actually a service dog?
In the community, I'm sorry.
You were on.
Popping off, okay. In the community, individuals are not required to do that, so we would not do that in the school setting for adults. For our students, if they are in need of a service animal, because it would be in the classroom, we would ask for additional documentation, and that will be noted in our administrative rule. And that's the standard we've used for students who have service animals.
Okay, further questions or comments?
Mr. Manning?
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Mackey.
With regard to the students, just to expound upon that, I know in the collegiate setting, I know that you have dogs. Students will bring dogs, I know collegiately, and saying that they're service animals, so they require, I know at that level, to make sure that they're certified and have paperwork. But that's just a comment with regard to that. But what I wanted to say is with regard to these policies, I just wanted to appreciate our administrative staff. I know that historically speaking, when these things come from the school board association, sometimes they could be very raw. But I mean, the time that you're taking to go through them and the insertions that staff is making are very well thought through. And I just wanted to take the time to commend our staff. This doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen magically, but I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Mackey. Any other questions or comments? If I can please have a motion for adjournment?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yep.
I move to adjourn the October 1st, 2019 special call meeting for the purpose of policy work session.
Motion's been made by Ms. Mackey. Do I have a second?
Absolutely a second.
Dr. Caution Parker, everyone in favor, raise your right hand.
Oh, man.
And motion passes unanimously.